God, it's been a while. I feel like it's been like 7 years, but it's really been like 2 months. Um, I would say happy spring because we're in late April, but it's like outside. I feel like to call it spring. This is my southern behind. Now, I apologize if the rest of y'all don't think it's cold, because I think it's cold. So I'll at least another month, maybe weeks if the sun gets its act together. Is this another full spring? No, you're going to miss spring again. Oh, I'm going to miss it. Okay, good. Yeah. Oh, perfect. I see I'm ready for summer. I'm here for summer. That's the way I was raised. Can't do this. This in me. And my plants don't like it either when anyone else has started seeds. Do you have a garden? I have some little raisins. What do you think about plants here? Tomatoes, peppers, yeah, stuff that's easy. Easy? Yeah. I don't know. The tomatoes are tough though. I struggle with tomatoes. Probably everyone else finds them super easy. Probably a couple good ones. Okay. Okay. Well, apparently I got bad tomatoes. I hope we get good ones this year. That's that Purdue education. I bet you can grow on couch of that. Yeah. Exactly. That's the problem going to school in Miami. You don't learn useful stuff. Well, welcome y'all to the month of April, Books, Booze, and Brains. I hope y'all enjoyed this book. I don't know, for those of you who read our March book, Something Deeply Hidden, that's a book about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and that kind of went over my head about a third of the way through. I had to stop reading. I'm so honest with y'all. I'm like brutally honest with y'all. That book was too much for me. I had to quit. And so when I picked this one up, I started reading. This was an easy read. It was a nice read. It was gentle on my poor little brain, and it was a nice break, I think, from the complexities of trying to understand quantum physics, because I am not that smart. And so, before we get started, before we talk about the home place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature, I want to go ahead and start out by thanking the people who made this possible, including Indiana Sciences, Indiana Humanities, and the Indianapolis Public Library, because our public libraries are the lifeblood of reading, and literature and literacy is important, which I think all of us know that, but it seems like there's maybe a select few who maybe don't appreciate it the way that we do, which is maybe a conversation for another day. But today we're going to get into the home place, and with us to talk through this book with us is our guest, Kay, who nobody knows you the way you do. So introduce yourself and tell us more about yourself, your background, and maybe what brought you here.
Yeah, my name is Kay Hawthorne. I was born and raised in Indianapolis, just north of downtown. Went to Princeton Statics and got degrees in anthropology and public health from Purdue. And since I graduated, I've been back in town doing community history stuff, environmental justice work in the near northwest areas, Riverside, Hawthorne, and then in the near southeast area, Norwood and Barrington, working with descendants of the Civil War U.S. colored troops. And I also wanted to talk about anthropology and just kind of what that is.
Yeah.
Broadly, it's the study of humans, why we do what we do mainly. And I focus on applied sociocultural anthropology, which really involves me getting out in the community, learning about people and the kind of reasons behind their habits in an effort to build community and instill environmental justice in those communities. That application has mainly been environmental, focusing on the waterways and gardening.
And gardening, okay, so then I'm going to need to hire you for a consultation because I'm struggling right now. Like I said, the tomatoes are only the beginning of my gardening problems, but not the end.
I enjoy community gardening because you do like a 10th of the effort and you get just as much.
Community gardening, yeah, especially in Indianapolis. I've seen a couple popping up in my neighborhood too, over on the west side. So apparently, whatever you're doing is working because it's making its way through Indianapolis, greater Indianapolis. So you talk about your background and your expertise in anthropology being the study of humans, but in this book and in your work, you're really studying humans and the environment. And part of why we picked this book and part of why I really enjoyed this book was about how deeply and how honestly in such loving detail that he talks about his upbringing in nature and how nature shaped him, and how the environment around him and the environment that he was fortunate enough to grow up in South Carolina shaped who he was and who he wanted to be, whether that be through family or through like direct interactions with the environment around him. But we know that the environment is not only shaping us, we shape the environment that we are around. I know it's a loaded question, but humans, we impact the environments that we live in and that we stay in. Sometimes in a positive way, but most of the time not. So can you tell us a little bit more, or maybe go into your experiences through your work with human impact on the environment beyond the concrete jungles, maybe, that we live in?
Yeah, well, I'd say the communities that I work in are typically brownfields, and those are communities that have been degraded by mainly industry. And so, for example, if you're near factories, a lot of gas plants, the community of Norwood on the southeast side was right across the street from the Citizens Gas coke plant for almost 100 years. It was a thriving old orchard forest before, I'd say in the early 1900s, and by 2009, when the coke plant closed, it was one of the biggest black fields in the world, actually. And so there's definitely that relationship of industry and human intentions and actions on these communities, and focusing on how we can build community in order to reverse some of those effects. And so, under ideal circumstances, most of the time, people are pretty stationary and they want to stay where they are, but sometimes conditions force people to leave, sometimes conditions force people to adapt, and I like what you say about that. Because we have come to walk upright, discovered fire, or at least how to use it. That is who we are as a species, not just aberrational, but at a unique edge to evolution and technology. We adapt, we master. Art of nature, we overcome it, shaped by history, and we know it. And I think that really speaks to kind of his views on how we interact with nature.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I thank you for reading that quote from the book. Absolutely, there are a few areas where he really hammers home, not only his relationship with the environment around him, but how he feels that we as humans can move forward in our relationship with the environment. Because, I mean, he acknowledges throughout the book, negative. And I really like the example that you talk about in your work that you're talking about, because we think of things in such an individualistic manner, and so we're thinking, my backyard. I'm thinking, oh, the park down the street. But you're talking about, this is an industry that came and has laid waste to these lands, and has laid waste to this environment, now starting to be claimed, and we're now starting to see as that has fallen to absolutely human intention and human greed, but now we're using that as an opportunity to reclaim and to have a net positive impact, not only on the land and the environment, which obviously we care about, but also to have a net positive impact on the community and the people. And that balance can seem hard. I think it's not seem hard. I think it is hard. And that's a theme that if you stayed with us over the years that we've talked about environmental books and nature-based books, we have those discussions, and it's really hard to do. And so to take an opportunity like that and to see that not as, oh, I'm so sad this happened, so sad this industry has laid waste to this land and has completely ruined it, and you say, no, they're gone, let's take this and do something with it. And that is so powerful, and that, even on a small scale, has such a huge impact. And this is happening in Indianapolis. He's doing work in South Carolina. It's happening. And it's really, I think, beautiful to see happening in Indianapolis. So thank you for not only your work, but for your excerpt from the book. I think it really ties together nicely. And I think that takes us really nicely into our first turn and talk question that I want to pose to you all. So for those of you maybe who are new to Books, Booze, and Brains, a turn and talk question. I'll give you a question to talk about at your table, amongst your group, and then I'll give you about like maybe 5-10 minutes to talk, and then we'll come back and you guys can share some of the things that you talked about, and then we can talk about them, and then we will be talking for the live stream and for the recording. So you're not on the hook just yet. So my turn to talk to you, deals with this relationship to the land. And the author throughout the book talks about his relationship to his homeland. But he acknowledges that it's a complex relationship, as deep and meaningful as it is, and as much as his relationship to the environment of South Carolina shaped him as a boy, as a man, as a scholar, as a professor at Clemson University. There's a nuance to that, and he recognizes and acknowledges that a lot of the land that he loves and that draws him to South Carolina was formed and shaped in ways not only by slavery and enslaved people, but potentially his ancestors. And he talks about his genealogy and his lineage and how, as the deep love and connection he feels, it's nuanced. And he also recognizes that not everybody will have the same opinions to land that he does, and maybe not feel the same way, especially in South Carolina, that he does as a Black man. And so I want you all to, as a turn and talk, to reflect and maybe think about the way that land, the possession of land, ownership of land, it's just a tiny piece, a tiny brick, this giant, blue marble floating through space way too fast for me to even comprehend. But why does our ownership, our possession of this land, why does that have such deep meaning? As an individual, because we're humans, we think individually, but also thinking collectively as a people. And if you were with us maybe last year or last season, we read Braiding Sweetgrass, which is from the same publisher, Milkweed, and it's an indigenous woman talking about how she lost her connection, her familial connection to her land, and how powerful that was for her, motivating her to write the book and explore those tribal connections. And so for your turn to talk, I want you to ask yourself, why is the ownership of land so meaningful and so powerful, both as an individual, but as a collective and as a culture, as a people? So I'll give you like 5-10 minutes if I remember the concept of time. Maybe if I was here for the quantum discussion book, I would know. But I'll give you about 10 minutes and then we'll come back and you guys can share maybe some of your thoughts and discussions. All right. Human nature better than I could expand. What do you think in the context of land? everyone's upbringing and everything that goes on. I mean, obviously, for anyone who introduced me in, he accepts that, the land almost not, I mean, he's older at my years, maybe arguments about it's how it all initially happened. Years later, in terms when it started real changes, losing back other land, I care about I love to anything that talks about it. Economics that not everybody understands. Not everybody sees. Also, it
Yeah.
That's like no, I mean here. I can't get it out of here. I also yeah, you're worried about I actually looked. I have a. I used to let these things go for like 20 minutes because I didn't have. I'd just go. So it's actually been 10 minutes, and I actually timed it because somebody got gifted a watch for Christmas. I'm 28 and I got my first watch. Isn't that exciting? I love the pity clash, the pity half clash. I'm living, laughing, and loving for that. So I'm curious to hear what you guys, if any of you guys came to. We had a really interesting discussion, and I think we're going to hit on. I'm going to bring up a couple of those points with you, but I want to know what did you guys, if you came to a conclusion, maybe not a conclusion, but just had some thoughts about land ownership, either as an individual or maybe if you thought of it like culturally or as a group. We do have a microphone, so we will hear what you say. But in a minute.
So our has an interesting thought, which was that land is an interesting position because this family owned quite a bit of land. And like, of course, they were descended from former slaves, so they were free, but didn't have the ownership of the land. And so, like, of the positions that had been in the position, and think about how that really must have been fun, is love of nature and experience of different things.
Yeah, he was over 200 acres. He said it was part of that. You're right. That's not like, oh, my little quarter-acre lot on the suburb. No. I mean, that is true farmland. And you actually brought up a good point in our discussion talking about agriculture and farmland culture. We're not talking about quarter-acre lots in the suburbs. I mean, we're talking about a totally different culture of land ownership and even family and neighbor dynamics. You know, we're talking about land ownership in that context. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we also realize there's a lot of self-sufficiency there. If you own your land, you always farm, you raise livestock, or as an example, if you go out and plant a beer, you have it for 2 years. That's a huge advantage too.
Absolutely, yeah. cow lasts a long time. Being from Central Florida, I did know being from Florida is a part of my personality, and I will only apologize marginally. Knew a lot of people who herd cattle. Did you know Florida is the second largest in the U.S.? I know, wild. Anyway, one cow lasts a long time in a good winter. But yeah, did anybody else have any thoughts before I start asking you about what we talked about? Because I feel like we had a really good discussion and not just us.
So, just the general question of like your thoughts on land ownership from an anthropology perspective, like the ownership of land is serving a purpose to kind of reinforce the social contract to say like if I buy into society, society helps me own land so that marauders, other people don't come and take it from me. And I just wondered, is that what are your thoughts on that? Uninformed guess of like a kind of history of what land ownership, what purpose it serves in the background, and is that a real take, or is that just something that made up in my
Well, I feel like there's been a lot of movements, for lack of a better word, where land was even given out. So to people that the powers that you wanted to have land. So for example, my alma mater Brigham Young institution, giving all these white institutions tons of land right after emancipation was definitely a choice, and wanting them to have that ability to self-sustain, as well as I think what war was that? Maybe the war of 1812. Veterans of that war were given tons of land in Indiana. That's pretty much why the Indianapolis area was settled, was because people were given land to come and settle it. And that ownership sort of perpetuates, like you said, those social contracts of we want you to do this, so we're going to give you resources on this versus this other group of people. We don't want you to have this ability to self-sustain, so you're not going to get that land, or at least have the ability to have access to tons of it. There was another part of your question, I feel like.
just the historical nature, even further back to land and that being used to reinforce the social contract. I think you kind of touched on that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so he was asking about like thinking about land ownership in like a historic context. Like, are we just doing this because there's like a social contract amongst all of us that land ownership is good? Having the land, protecting me, mine, like my land, my stuff, my self-sufficiency, me, mine. Is that just something that we perpetuate? And that's actually something that we kind of talked about in our discussion with the live stream audience. And we're talking about thinking about land ownership and self-sustaining and agriculture in an individualistic manner. Or thinking about me, mine versus, well, what's best for the collective? What's best for the community? What's best for those around me? And maybe that's not me having a little piece of paper with a government that doesn't really matter, Like if that burned up, if everything burned up and went away, that is still going to be there, and it's still going to be able to produce vegetables and raise livestock and self-sustain. But then that little paper, those little squares won't be there. Like land, what do I do? And so thinking about it, and I think you talked about it so well in our meeting.
And I guess I'll plug this while giving an example. But the Lawrence Community Garden out east it's right by a factory that had this large, I want to say it was a couple acres of land that they really was paying to get mowed every couple of weeks. And so the woman who founded Lawrence Community Garden was pretty much like to garden this land. And so even though they don't own that land, they're still able to produce. They still have chicken coop and a whole bee sanctuary and everything, and that's something that they're able to do because of land stewardship versus land ownership, which is part of that conversation we have with the large audience. And so just being able to think about it differently and not as much in a exploitative way, but more in a productive way for the larger community and not just for what the landowner can get from it.
And do you see yourself in the work you do amplifying that message and maybe working towards that, towards other people seeing things like land ownership in a more communal and beneficial sense?
Yeah, for sure. It's a little more tricky when you go to the waterways, but at least for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because water is public access. Things like the White River, often you can get on legally fishing, you might need a permit, but it doesn't really matter where you go. But for me, for sure, that number.
Yeah, so okay, we won't get into water, too complicated, too much. And probably a lawyer that's like, going, oh, this is my entire life. And so before we move on to kind of my next, I guess, topic or interest and stuff, I want to talk to you about your favorite chapter of the book, because I don't know, I'm woman enough to admit that I cried at the end of this book. I cried. I felt like I learned about who Drew Lanham was and his family, and maybe it's because I'm from the South, and so I mean, whatever, Florida being South, right? I'm from North Carolina, I got family in North Carolina, so I'll claim that. And so like hearing his stories about his family and going through that, I fully cried. I related to this book so hard, and I love it so much. And so I want to hear you talk about your favorite chapter and your favorite part of the book.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of genealogy work. So when you work on history, the first thing that you ask someone is where you're from, where are your people from, where your parents, your grandparents. And so I really appreciate how he sort of paced the story. A Good Name was my favorite chapter, where he goes into talking about first his father and the name Hoover, having the name Hoover in the 1930s, and how that quickly changed from being a really powerful name to being a really disappointing name, I guess. But he talked about his father taking that name and then reinstilling some of that power into it. But it was really cool because he was talking about his mother's family. He mentioned that she was from 96, South Carolina, which is where my sister's mother is from. And my brother went there for the first time for Christmas this past year, and just learning about her family. And again, farming community, very small, so to see it in this book was like very random. And so I'm calling her, I'm like, is your mom Melanie Jones is from 96? She's like, yeah, she remembers them. So like having a connection and that extra bit of context to, you know, how his mother was raised and how that would have influenced him was really cool to see. And yeah, just the power of parents, and you know, not saying that, you know, oh, my dad is perfect and he did everything perfectly, but the good thing about seeing just a hardworking parent and that gives you so many, you can see even if he applies it differently, just seeing where he got that from, that sort of diligence and attention to detail that his father instilled in him, which I can definitely relate to, even not growing up on a bunch of land that needed to be tilled, but just even having a father that could do it all, the plumbing, the electrician, he was the electrician, like I very rarely saw maintenance people come into my house, and she just kind of had it handled, and hoping that stuff with me, yeah, you know, as a new renter, sometimes I look at things and I'm like, but
yeah, and I'm going into YouTube and I'm like, how to unbox things. Yeah, that's how you knew it was bad too, because that was in the days before you could just get on your phone and Google, how do I fix X, Y, Z appliance? How do I replace X, Y, Z pipe, board, circuit, whatever?
you just really had to sit under someone and learn. And so, and even hearing that timeline of knowing that his father was able to learn from George Washington Carver as well. He was a Tuskegee. It's like, wow.
The emphasis on timeline I thought was really interesting, and there are very few books that I feel like do this well. And I feel like it's really important in understanding not only an individual, but understanding how a family and how their he talks about his environment and the environmental circumstances and how nature shaped him. But he also emphasizes how the world events that were happening to his grandmother and to his mother and his father going to war, how those shaped those individuals, their behaviors and habits, that shapes the way that they, interacted with their land and how they, felt about, various, whether it be drawing circles on your stomach and pulling out a tummy ache, which was a little much, but listen, I've seen weirder. I feel like it's real. When he said that, I was like, I believe you. I believe he felt better after that. To go into his father and all the experiences that he had. Putting your family's experiences and your upbringing in historical over 100+ year context, so hard to do that well. And I think this is like a masterclass in how to do that well in an impactful way. I mean, the world history of the 1900s is happening. So this isn't happening in a vacuum on a farm in South Carolina. We're not thinking about South Carolina now. I mean, it's so brilliant. You hit the nail on the head, and that was also one of my favorite parts. Not just that chapter, but that, I think, genealogy of his family. Again, I feel like I know him. I don't. Wouldn't know him from Joe.
He wrote this really well.
No, absolutely. Very vulnerable. Yeah, and if, like I said, this publisher, Milkweed, who wrote another book, Breaking Sweetgrass, also highly recommend. A beautiful, beautiful book. Also made me cry. Maybe there's a theme here. Maybe I'm just crying a lot. So thank you for sharing your favorite part of this book. And so now I kind of want to change gears and kind of shift gears and talk about environmental justice. I know you've talked about what you do already, but your work here in Indianapolis. But I really, I want to get more to what is environmental justice, and not just, obviously the work we do. And it's something I think we've heard a lot about as we've gone through some of these nature-centered books. We talk about land reclamation, we talk about the environment, but I don't think we've ever really dived into this topic. And so I feel like you're the perfect expert to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to read the official EPA definition first. It says environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. So what I would add to that is that environmental justice should create and push forward reparatory practices and policies that uplift communities harmed by environmental oppression. And that's the work that I do. So again, working with brownfield communities, these are communities that are heavily polluted, both the land, the waterways, and everything. So my introduction, because I really didn't expect to end up in environmental justice.
Oh, really?
Not at all.
Okay.
Because again, I was very people focused, and I was very inspired by learning of ancient peoples. My introduction to anthropology was archaeology, so I learned about people from human names.
Okay.
But I got the opportunity to do an internship at Groundwork ND, which is located in Riverside, and just getting to learn from Phyllis Boyd at the time, who's now the director of ND Parks. And I specifically worked with Riverside's community-led environmental action plan, which, of other things, I mainly led their lead testing program. So getting people lead testing kits in collaboration with IUPUI to test their soil. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me, because you're sitting on this land and you have engaged with it in one way or another, but to see people find out that their land is polluted and the soil that their kids have been playing in has been contaminated with lead, or the soil that they've been growing their gardens in has been, contaminating their vegetables and fruits and everything. And other parts of neighborhood action would be like tree cover, because if you don't have enough trees in a certain neighborhood, you feel the effects of global warming a lot more. The temperature is literally higher in these places, and it's harder to maintain that water cycle because you don't have the same ability to evaporate and move that forward. And so taking action with the input from neighbors in order to plant trees when trees can be planted, when it makes sense to do that, it's not a hazard, not just wanting to go out and like, oh, we're gonna plant a bunch of trees, but, talking to people and making sure that it makes sense for them. And if there's exposed soil in the yard where children might be playing, being able to get some mulch to cover that up so that kids aren't exposed to that as much. The paint as well.
Is that where it's coming from?
Yeah. In some cases, especially with older houses, I think most houses probably built before 1950. The paint on the walls would be red, but yeah, when you have lived next to a bunch of factories your entire life, that's what's going to happen to the area around you. So that really pushed me into environmental justice work and being able to communicate with people, learn more about their relationship to their neighborhood, because environmental history is not separate from the rest of the history of your neighborhood.
Absolutely,
Yeah. So for example, Riverside being just down the street from Hallville, and if anyone's familiar with the Belmont Beach project, that is the beach that it was the one beach that Black people could go to in the early 1900s. And of course, it was the most polluted part of the White River at that time. And so the Hallville Neighborhood Association helped to form, I don't know what their collective is actually called, but working with the Hallville Neighborhood Association to revitalize Belmont Beach as a place of just being social and helping to clean the White River through that side. We actually have cleanup on Saturday in space with Belmont Beach. So that was really fun. But yeah, that was kind of my introduction into environmental justice. And even when it doesn't seem like the environment is involved with what's going on, it doesn't take long talking to community members to realize that this isn't quite right, or I see these, strange like roads, like we're talking about the algae that grows off the coast.
Yeah.
Seeing that in the Central Canal that holds our drinking water is not fun. And so, yeah, does that answer the question?
No, it absolutely does, and I love hearing the EPA definition, one, because you absolutely, you're like, let me look this up, word for word, we're doing this, we're not making it up. But I think the key words there were equal access, and the reality is that a clean environment is not, as much as we obviously everybody deserves clean drinking water, everybody deserves clean air, and everybody deserves to play in dirt that's not full of lead. But the reality is that the Black communities, especially in America, have ended up dealing with probably the worst of the worst when it comes to environmental pollution. So when we're talking about environmental justice, there's a subsect of Black environmental justice that the author talks about, and the author is involved with in some of his pursuits in ornithology and in nature conservation. But I mean, it's not just, the people impacting the land and then using that impact to further, negatively impact, especially Black communities. And you provide a great example here in Indiana. I'm relatively new to Indiana, had no idea. Never heard of Belmont. Also would have never thought of a beach being in Indiana. So,
yeah, that's always fun with the kids.
Yeah.
When we say we're going to the beach and we drive down the street and they're really confused. But then they go in and pick seashells and stuff, and it's really fun. But seashells, maybe not Florida seashells.
I'm thinking. Yeah. I had no idea. And so you have a beach cleanup on Saturday. You're looking for volunteers, but I'm also
yeah. I'm working with Friends of the White River as the environmental justice outreach coordinator. And so yeah, we're meeting at Belmont Beach, which is right across the street from Magical Learning, School 63. if you're familiar with that school, but it's right in Hallville's neighborhood. If you know Long's Bakery, it's not far from there.
That was one of the first things I got introduced to when I moved here was Long's Bakery.
It's important.
It seems,
And we'll have Long's Bakery donuts there on Saturday, so.
that's what matters. I mean, also the beach and the beach. And so, when I think, we've talked about land ownership and we've talked about, environmental justice, to me, and maybe this is just like a not very informed take, it seems like the concept of land ownership, property ownership, environmental justice, it seems like they really just don't mix. They cannot coexist. It's like mixing oil and water. And so, my question to you is, when you think about land conservation, when you think about environmental justice, maybe we're thinking more in the context of large swaths of rural land, but can these two concepts coexist, and how do you see that being applied both in a rural context, but also in an urban context like this, where we might not think of nature or the environment in the same way?
Yeah. I feel like at its core, ownership of anything really boils down to control. And I'm a very firm believer that humans are not as smart as we make ourselves out to be. So sometimes us having control over things will not actually make things better or keep things good. But ownership of property, especially by an oppressive class, depends on people using land to the fullest extent, which is usually going to push them into exploitation of the land, of people, of other animals. And so even though that's something that I'm still working to answer for myself, like if land ownership and environmental justice can coexist, I don't think most of the time. And I'm not someone who's really versed in reality of things. And like you said, we have pieces of paper, so what happens if the records disappear,
Yeah.
But I think that's where the land ownership versus land stewardship piece comes in, and we can talk more about what are we doing to benefit this land more so than whose name is on the paper. And that gets really difficult when people have traditionally been pushed out of land ownership. And it can be really useful for someone to have it on a piece of paper so that they have the protections that can help sustain them. And in some cases, the land can't sustain you if your name's not on the paper. Absolutely. Ergo, the Reconstruction era and why that was so hard, talking about, 40 acres of renewal and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it can be really difficult. But talking about the rural setting versus the urban setting, I do 100% think that environmental justice can happen in urban settings, especially when we stop thinking that the way things have been is the way things need to be. And, you can always pull up concrete, it's not permanent, so you can, things can be changed. And, so for example, in Norwood, which is just a prospect from Fountain Square, that was one of the neighborhoods that the U.S. colored troops founded shortly after the Civil War. So during the Civil War, Indiana wasn't reaching its quota for soldiers, and so they drafted all the black men in Indiana and sent them over to Osbrook Street in Fountain Square, and they were based there on Calvin Fletcher's land that he got from being a veteran of the War of 1812. And after the war, about a quarter of them survived and came back, and founded Norwood among other areas. And so even though this is a neighborhood where, of course, now roads are paved, houses are built, there are forces of gentrification, new age colonization that are, Two Chicks and a Hammer, if anyone saw that, really, really put the nail on the coffin. I think before Two Chicks and a Hammer, there were about 30, I want to say, residents of Osbrook Street that had been there since the Civil War, and now it is about war. And so it's really, really driving that home, and that those efforts are moving further east into Norwood, Bennington, and other areas. And like I said, Norwood was right across from the coke plant, which the city felt was okay to put there because no one lived there.
Yeah, well, nobody they deemed important. Exactly. They're not building that up tomorrow.
Right. And at that time, Keystone was city limits, so Norwood was actually an independent Freetown that was annexed into Indianapolis in 1912, and even then didn't have like paved roads in the 70s. But yeah, it's a really crazy story. It's a really crazy story. But a neighborhood like that can absolutely experience growth when we are more flexible about what can growth look like, and it can look like providing people with the protections of, historic district designations and things like that to make sure that that development corporations can't just come in and build houses whenever they want and bring property taxes and things like that. Because at the end of the day, if you can't afford to live somewhere, then you can't really do anything about what's happening there. Absolutely. And being right in that Pleasant Run watershed, the waterways plays into that as well. And Pleasant Run is not the cleanest.
Understatement of it.
Yeah. But yeah, environmental justice can 100% happen in an urban setting. I think it just requires a little bit more flexibility and visioning, especially when it comes to parks and things like that. The vast green spaces that we do have, which should be getting a 44-acre park on the land of John Wesley Hartford. It was one of the first, I think it was the first major black painter out of Indiana. And yeah, it just takes that line of thinking and this vision.
Yeah, and you bring up such an important point. We think about land ownership and having the piece of paper as an exclusionary piece, but it can be a protection, and having that ownership and having those designations can be, you kind of work with what you got, right? And this is us working with what we got. If we have to have a piece of paper to prove something and to, get to an end goal that we want, then so be it. That's us working within the confines of our reality, but absolutely, but being able to use that and take that and shift the needle on the way we're thinking about land, not only ownership, but land use and the impact that it can have and the uses that we can have for it as a collective. It's so important. And I mean, we've had this discussion. How do you even begin to change the needle on something like that? Because it's cumulative individual actions to get to that end goal. And so we find these groups of like-minded people, and we all get together and we all say, yes, we feel this way. Yes, we're going to do this. But we're in a city of what, 1 million people, and I do love. I love your quote. Concrete can be ripped up. I think we see urban areas as whatever. Especially in the context of nature, conservation, land, or whatever. It's not a concrete. Nothing we can do. It can be ripped up. You can absolutely reclaim that and do something like that. And I'm one of those people. I look at it as the abandoned parking lot, and like, that's a lot of concrete. That's going to be there forever. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. There's so much you can do with that. So, how do you even begin to get people to think on a collective, maybe larger scale? Or do you just work, piece by piece, person by person? Is that the approach?
Yeah, one book that I would definitely suggest anyone who's interested in environmental justice should read is called Undrowned by Alexis Pauline Jones. It's a really kind of poetic book, but she is really interested in marine life. So it's called Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals. And one phrase that I took away from that book was, all water touches all water everywhere. And she said that, speaking about specificity and how sometimes we feel the need to attack the whole problem, but really, if we attack our problem, that will provide sort of a guide to other people to attack their problems, and just maybe the more of a network that you develop through that, I think that's the way to actually push something forward. So, for example, at groundwork, when you're working on a community-led environmental action plan, we did porch parties, and so that was just connecting with different members of the community and having them host a program from their porch, invite their immediate neighbors, and we were able to talk about kind of the data that we have for the scientists, but also what are your individual experiences, and that seemed to be the best way to open people's eyes to the issues and what they could do to solve them. And once we hand out these testing kits and we have more data, we can know, this block has these issues, and it becomes easier to address, and whether that's just one thing we did was hand out water filters that people could filter their water, and that's just one take off the mountain of to-do list that you could. Absolutely, just starting one person at a time, explaining to someone or a group of people, and that snowballed pretty fast. So the whole community was involved with that. And once one community graduated, they came to provide those instructions to the next community. And we have that network throughout the city, and then we have a Indianapolis Environmental Justice Coalition, Environmental Council, and we can get up to that level to where you have more access to everything. But I'm definitely not going doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you putting in the work, and you can go, you've put in so much work, and you've made so much progress, in the areas that you have worked, and you go, hey, look what I've been doing for them. This is working, it's improving their quality of life, it's improving all of these other measures that likely also apply to you. Let's do something about it. And I mean, even just, I love the idea of a porch party. And people in my neighborhood have been there. Most of them have known each other for decades. I feel like that would be so much fun to do a porch party. I tried talking to my neighbors about the lead we had a Indiana scientist hosted a talk a few years ago where we talked about the lead problem and the lead contamination in the soil and in the water. And I mentioned that to my neighbors, and they thought it was nuts. They were like, no way. I showed them the bright red on that graph, and I was like, I don't think this is a joke. I think y'all have been eating lead. Throwing your vegetables right up at the front of your house. It's wild what you can do. Just knocking on the door, saying, "Hey, I'm your neighbor. I care about you." And I feel like that's something that really through this book really emphasizes. He emphasizes, I do what I do because I care, not about the land, not just about the land, I care about the land, but I care about the people that it impacts, and I care about helping others to not only, better the land through bettering themselves and, bettering the environment around them, because I care about that too, but it betters them, and it betters, their quality of life and their living situations, and the power that has to give to somebody and to give to a community and say, here's this thing, and I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to help give you the resources, to improve these aspects of, land, your life, whatever. So powerful, and, definitely one of the take-home messages of this book, and it sounds like one of the take-home messages of you and the work you're doing in Indianapolis. Oh my God, of course, you're welcome. No, it just sounds like you're doing really awesome stuff, and I feel like you deserve, what is it, you deserve your flowers for all the work you're doing. That's what, you're sitting in the expert seat for a reason. You're sitting in the expert seat for a reason. There's a reason I can call you an expert. Because you are, and Purdue didn't give that to you, you did. Yeah. And so, I want to close out. I'm going to close out with the turning top questions. And obviously we'll talk. One of my take-home messages from this book, was not just environment and family and maybe crying a little bit at the end. It was about reflection and how powerful reflection can be when you're really thoughtful and pointed about it. And it's not just like your teachers at the end of the year going, okay, reflect on what you learned. No, this is reflect on your life and your family. Where did you grow up? How did that shape you? How did that experience with your grandmother in the kitchen, drawing circles on your stomach, impact you in the way you raise your kids? That level of reflection, I don't think many people, I mean, we don't have time to sit here with you. I mean, we're all so busy living our modern 21st century lives that we probably don't sit and think about those things maybe. But, you know, my turn and talk question for you is I want you all to reflect and think about your life experiences. And I want you to think about moments or trips or people that really shape who you are. And I'm not trying to sit here and make everyone cry. But, you know, and obviously I'm thinking about this in the context of, you know, hikes I've taken with family members or like nature, landscapes or environments, you know, that have shaped me and my experiences. And I, you know, I think of orange, like us running through orange groves in Florida, hoping like somebody would find us. Or, you know, running through cow pastures and cow sitting was very real and it can be fun. Things like that, like, yeah, and likely will shape, you know, my future direction and the decisions that I make. And I feel like reflection is something we don't do often enough. Maybe I'm insane. But I think eventually like 5 minutes. And you can share something that's like less personal, it's like sob stories. But like, I don't know. And think about the environments and the people who shape you into who you are. Maybe you're great, maybe you're not. Maybe it's like a one, maybe got stung by a bee, like got lost in a trail for 3 hours. I don't know. That'd be fun. I'd be down for you to share that one. And I actually have a very similar story. Maybe that's why that came to my mind. So I want you guys to take like 5 minutes. Think about an environment that shaped you. A beautiful landscape. You visited like Alaska and you thought it was awesome. I don't know. Just think about those things. Maybe they shaped you, maybe they didn't.
Out there, this man poured his heart out, and it really bare his soul to how important these environments were for him. You know, as I'm finishing the book and I'm sitting and reflecting on the book, I think about the book and I'm reflecting on the impact that reading his story had on me. Everybody has stories like that, and obviously everyone has a family that has shaped them. Everyone has people that shape them. Not everyone has 200 acres of land in South Carolina that, you know, shapes them or wanting to be an ornithologist. Pop off. But like, you know, there's environmental factors that shape who we are. I don't know, it got me thinking about that. I thought, I don't know, I could promise that for the people who have maybe a drink or two in them. I found myself being a little bit
Oh no, you're totally fine.
I guess I'm
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, that's the important part. You're like, no. Like I said, how does that relate to this other? That's just it was just enough that it would be familiar to me. Like if I didn't live in I love it. When you said 14, I'm like, no, it's a mushroom. Yeah. But what she said is always share fries. Yeah. Never there's something to get out there. They're like, nope. Turn around. Look me in the other. Yeah, but growing up, that's just you're young. You get exposed to it. You get the opportunity to do it. Not overwhelming. Not scary. Having family who are familiar with you.
things like that that maybe shape you can be very personal. So obviously, you don't have to share anything you don't want to. And if you'd rather just ask our wonderful expert a question, also fair game on the table. But if you have an experience that may be something similar to this book, and not similar to this book that you would like to share, you think is funny, I once had a bee on my neck, pushed the bee into my neck, and stung myself effectively. And that was probably one of my worst experiences with hair. Don't ask me why. Don't ask why I did it. Don't know. Even had somebody tell me, hey, the bee's on your neck. And I went, what? Bam, right in the neck. I'm not allergic though. There's too much. Does anyone have maybe better? Or I hope you don't have a word story. Don't tell me the bad story. But if anyone has a story or a nature experience you'd like to share, or if you, like I said, if you'd like to ask your expert a question about either the book, environmental justice, environmental racism, Indianapolis, you have a lot of things going on in Indy. Talk about that story. You don't have